Hello everyone, my name is Ego Cognis and I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. I want to talk about Little Rock and some of the blatant corruption and ineptitude surrounding this city. We've been the national hotspot only a couple of times. The Little Rock Nine, for example, when Eisenhower had to send in the 101st Airborne to escort black students past protesters to attend Central High School. We also hit mainstream news circulation when Bangin' in the Rock, a documentary about drug and gang warfare in Little Rock in the early 90s, was released by HBO to widespread acclaim. When I first moved to Little Rock, that documentary was the only thing I knew about the city. You also had the Clinton years, with such an extensive collection of various corruption scandals coming straight out of the Clinton governorship that they were noteworthy enough to be investigated in Congress. Looking at you, Vince Foster. While it's been almost 30 years since Clinton was governor of Arkansas, the political machine he left behind entrenched a rock solid hold for the Democrats in Little Rock. Other than the occasional flare up like this, Little Rock tends to stay out of the national spotlight. I'm not really sure why, since there's plenty to talk about. Like Little Rock police officers getting routinely caught stealing drugs during arrests and then reselling them on the street. And when I say routine, I mean it's been happening about once a year, every year, for the last 10 or 15 years. One can wonder why Little Rock Police Department keeps hiring these morally destitute and compromised officers, but that's a good question that can probably be extrapolated out to most major cities in America. No, we're going to talk about the disastrous decision Little Rock has made in the last year or so. Keith Humphreys was hired in 2019 to fill the vacant role of police chief out of a candidate selection that included a surprising number of highly qualified candidates. Within a year, he was hit with a blatantly obvious corruption scandal. An administration services manager job was open, and Humphreys heavily pushed for a friend of his to acquire this job, a Miss Karen Hunter. I know, Karen, right? This position had an $80,000 a year salary and would be managing about $80 million dollars of budgeting for the Little Rock Police Department. There are multiple problems with him trying to push through Miss Hunter's employment. To start with, the only reason we found out these two knew each other was because another officer was called to Karen Hunter's street on an unrelated call at 4 in the morning and saw the police chief's vehicle in Miss Hunter's driveway. The chief and officer had a short chat, and this is pure assumption on my part here. There almost certainly was a conversation along the lines of, "Don't bring this up to anyone." The next problem with Miss Hunter's application were multiple falsehoods included in the application. She claimed to have a driver's license, and yet did not. She claimed to be the vice president of Philander Smith College, when in fact she was an assistant to the vice president. We can call this a Dwight Schrute lie. She was also the target of a lawsuit in Oklahoma over unpaid credit card bills, still pending as far as I know. Okay, so a police chief tried to give an unqualified candidate control over an $80 million budget just because she's his mistress. At least two Little Rock city directors called for his resignation, as well as the Little Rock Fraternal Order of Police. This is pretty bad, right? This information all came out publicly on May 15th. The mayor, black Democrat Frank Scott Jr., backed Humphreys and stated that he couldn't comment on internal hiring practices. On May 25th, George Floyd overdosed in Minneapolis while under arrest. Protests and riots sparked off, and on May 30th, downtown Little Rock joined in. The mayor and the police chief marched alongside the protesters. By 9 p.m., the protest had descended into a riot. The police chief and mayor were ushered away by their security detail as the mob let loose. Banks were mainly targeted, putting lie to the claim that these were marches for justice. A pharmacy 1 block away from the Arkansas Capitol building was looted and set on fire. After a few days, these riots were squashed, and not another word has been uttered about Chief Humphrey's indiscretions. It is absolutely infuriating that this sort of blatant abuse of power can get a spotlight shown on it, but for political optics, just gets ignored once a bigger story comes along. Chief Humphreys made several deriding statements after the protests about Little Rock Police Department being a segregated police force and the need for solidarity and unity with people of color. His calls might actually be believable if the timing of the political unrest in our country didn't obfuscate the obvious problems within both the Democratic Party as a whole as well as the Democratic Party of Arkansas. Karen Hunter's LinkedIn page shows her as still employed by Philander Smith College as assistant to the Vice President of Student Affairs and Enrollment Services. There has not been any update in any news story relating to this since May 20th. I will leave you with this. There is a reason Arkansans distrust the Democratic Party.